happy little games. Hey everybody, just a quick reminder that if you enjoy this content or any of my videos, be sure and leave a like. It helps support the channel and allows my videos to move it on up with YouTube's algorithm. Thanks again. In the 1950s, the science fiction craze was running wild, presented in full black and white throughout movie theaters all across the USA. In case you didn't know, the term B-movie or bad movie was used on these low-budget, extremely stanky, janky productions with acting that makes Steven Seagal look like Marlon Brando. And no, not just in the waistline either. However, some people have grown to love these types of movies, and not just my inbred cousins from Arkansas. I first became familiar with these types of movies thanks to the Acre Creature feature that was on Fridays and Saturday nights in my hometown. There are way too many to list, so here are just a few examples of the Oscar caliber films, including Catwoman of the Moon, Devil Girl from Mars, Rocket Ship XM, and many, many more. Today, we are sneaking a peek at a 1989 arcade game from the hit makers themselves, Atari, entitled Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters. This game featured the same goofy charm of those 1950s B movies and combined it with a little bit of color in a game that was a whole lot of fun to play. What's the origin of the crazy name of this game? What game inspired this arcade title? So grab your pitchforks because the aliens are here, because this is the history of Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters. Video games have used the schlock B-movie setting more than a few times in the past. Some notables include It Came from the Desert, which is a typical love letter to these types of movies. Everything from the packaging to the entire game itself is a huge nostalgia overload. Zombies Ate My Neighbors is another fun-filled, fantastic title from Konami, and who could forget the full motion game Night Trap. Atari was always known as the innovators when it came to game design, and by the time the 1980s were drawing to a close, they had produced a number of hits that not only showcased their innovative design, but also their innovative controls. There was everything from the spectacular Cops and Robbers title APB, to the whitewater tubing title, coincidentally enough, Tubin', and everything in between. The game was designed by Bonnie Smithson and Mark Stephen Pierce, with programming by David Ockers. Mr. Ockers broke into the business working for Mattel developing Atari 2600 games. After a few years had passed, he was hired by Atari and would go on to either develop or co-develop a number of classics such as Road Blasters, Klax, Pit Fighter, and San Francisco Rush. He loved the whole B-movie motif and wanted to include it in a unique game. Taking inspiration from Atari's own Gauntlet, as well as an Amiga title by the name of Where Time Stood Still, which is an isometric action-adventure game released by Ocean. The initial level was created by using graph paper and was a very tedious process. After the basic game was created, programmer David Ockers was brought on board to help flesh out the project. They ended up using a level editor that programmer Dennis Harper created when designing the game Tubin'. Using this process, they could create a level and instantly test it out, which was a very advanced technique for developers back in 1988. Mr. Ockers has stated that if it wasn't for Dennis Harper's involvement and coding knowledge, the game likely would have been scrapped. The look of the game was inspired by Paperboy and also Marble Madness, both employing isometric viewpoints. Originally, the game started out as more of a straight shoot-'em-up similar to the game Alien Syndrome. They wanted something that would stand out, which is another reason why the isometric viewpoint was chosen, as well as the unique control system. The game used the Atari Hall Effect joysticks, which gave your character a 360-degree movement and allowed you to shoot and rotate at the same time. Getting the game to market was extremely challenging. According to Mr. Ockers, they had put pressure on us to put the game out to test as quickly as possible. We said the game wasn't ready yet, but they insisted. So one night, Mark and I drove the game out to an arcade and set it up. At that time, the player had to pick up a key to unlock the escalator. But the first arcade goer picked up the key and then died before they could use it. When the character reappeared, the key was gone, so the player didn't have the key and the stairs were still locked. We apologized, refunded his money, and went back to the lab to fix it. At this point, they decided to change it to an action-adventure requiring you to rescue humans as well as activate power switches throughout the game. They wanted to integrate that same goofy 1950s sci-fi vibe into the actual gameplay as well. Similar to other Atari games from the past, including Gauntlet, a narrator will help you along the way. Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters was released by Atari in 1989. As the story goes, the lusty and just a little bit busty Professor Cerebellum has been kidnapped by the evil aliens known as Reptilons. They force her to create a robot army to take over the Earth and erase all mankind forever. The Space Corps have sent in Jake and Duke, who are the absolute best of the best. They have to make their way through the various defenses, rescuing all the humans, destroying all the robots, taking out the Reptilons, and finally rescuing Professor Cerebellum. This game is a 1 or 2 player sci-fi shoot-'em-up adventure with a little bit of RPG elements thrown in that sees you take control of either Jake or Duke as you make your way through the various levels, ultimately trying to rescue Professor Bellum. She is much more than just a beauty, as she has a vast knowledge of cybernetics. The introductory cutscenes do a perfect job at setting up the B-movie vibe and also letting you know exactly what is going on.
Your mission: transport all hostages back to your ship. Destroy all robots. Rid Planet X of the evil Reptilon. Find and rescue Professor Cerebellum.
When the game first starts up, you'll see a factory map of Planet X, which shows exactly where the factory waves, canal waves, and Reptilon waves are located. There are over 30 stages in the game, including both canal and boss fights. You won't have to play through all of the stages though, as there are branching paths, making for a little bit of replay value. The game uses a 3/4 overhead view, which was quite unique for the time. It's a bit funny because Escape was inspired by Gauntlet, and a couple of years after the release of this game, US Gold released Gauntlet 3 for various home computers utilizing the same perspective as found in Escape. The graphics are fantastic, utilizing a comic book style with slapstick humor. The art style reminds me of another Atari game, APB. The controls are fairly simple, with you having a joystick and a separate button for firing, jumping, and ducking. The gameplay is pretty simple, in which players have to rescue as many ragged prisoners as they can for extra points and a bonus at the end of each level. While rescuing these poor unfortunate souls, you also have to find the switches to activate the escalators or ladders to take you to the next floor in a factory level. The B-movie humor and sci-fi vibe is very evident, especially in the animations that bring the characters to life. Walking a little bit close to the edge of a floor, getting shocked by traps, or impaled is a bit too much fun in my opinion. Similar to Gauntlet, there is a ton of speech synthesis all throughout the game, and it really comes to light when it shows you what you need to do. Scattered all throughout Planet X are various robots for you to destroy. After disposing of one of these robots, they will usually drop gems which you will use to update the energy of your gun. To really progress in this game, you need to learn the layout of the factories and also use your firepower wisely. Each shot lowers the power of your gun slightly. Hidden inside of lockers are bombs which can be placed and detonated for a small explosion, and also food which gives you the much needed nutrients to complete your mission, which you will need because this game is difficult. Robots and cyberbots are literally around every turn, and to be honest, it reminds me of Robotron but only at an isometric perspective. You also have to contend with the giant reptilons. There is no time to stop and smell the roses because if you dawdle too long, a small orb will appear to zap you on your way. As you progress further through the game, the robots become more difficult. Some of these robots will shoot high, requiring you to duck, and others will shoot low, requiring you to jump. Other obstacles you have to contend with are electrified floors that you have to jump over, and also ledges that you have to jump up and grab. At the end of each factory level, you enter the canal zone in which you are piloting a ship, bobbing and weaving as you attempt to make it to the end before time runs out. This isn't as easy as it sounds because there are dead ends, which means you have to throw it into reverse to try a different path. There are 3 doors to choose from, which will take you to the next sector. After this, a cutscene shows a nice close-up view of your Dick Tracy watch as it tells you to use your bombs on the evil Reptilon boss. The bosses are very large, but similar to any other game, you just need to learn the patterns. After defeating each boss, you are whisked away through the Portal-matic and taken to the next factory. At the end of each mission, you are shown a status screen which shows exactly how many hostages you freed. The factory levels do not have names, although each one has a distinct color, different obstacles, and traps. There are not that many bosses in the game, but it doesn't matter as defeating them can be a bit tricky. As I mentioned, once you learn their patterns though, they aren't that bad. The bosses you encounter are Clam Walker, Manny Shots, Three Eyes, and the Brain. Once you defeat the final boss of the game, you are shown rescuing Professor Bellum and a nice congratulatory screen is shown.
Yeah!
Once you reach the final level, you are no longer able to continue. The game warned you of this, even giving you the options of adding more credits at this point to buy extra lives or extra bombs. At least Atari warned you about this up front. As I mentioned, this game is extremely difficult. Your character has an energy bar which allows 3 hits before you die. Depending on the dip switch settings, you usually start with 3 lives, but the maximum amount of continues is 9. In addition to the fantastic sound effects and voices, we have nice upbeat tunes that fit in perfectly with the rest of the game. When the game was released into arcades, it was a moderate hit, but that didn't stop the onslaught of conversions. Home computer users were stiff with joy once they learned that the competent tech software were tackling these conversions and not the team of tier techs which at the time were the mold standard. To be fair, tech software had their fair share of missteps as well, and in particular, certain conversions of hard driving, but nothing with the regularity that tier techs did. I can honestly say these all turned out pretty good, except for one, which I will get to in just a moment. Since this is an Atari arcade game, I think it's fitting we should start with the Atari ST version. This one is excellent with most of the arcade presentation carried over. Graphically, it looks very close to the arcade original, although it does have smaller sprites. The dreaded push-scrolling rears its ugly head, but it's not that noticeable once you start to play. Thanks to the single button joystick, you now have to press the left Alt key on the keyboard to drop bombs. The game controls really well, and it features a lot of robot action on screen at once with very little slowdown. The game does not feature any voices, and the music has been scaled back quite a bit. The ending screen of the Atari ST even features what looks like a wardrobe malfunction. Now perhaps it's just the way it's drawn, or it could be wishful thinking on my part, but to me, it definitely looks like a nipple. Or at least part of an areola. This wouldn't be the first time that Atari ST owners were given a little bit of that good old-fashioned boobage, because the ST version of Toki featured some pixely nipplies as well. If this is what it's like out in the great unknown, sign me up to be lost in space. What the ZX Spectrum lacks in color, it more than makes up for in fun gameplay. While it's only presented in monochrome, it does have a lot of detail in both the backgrounds and the sprites. The arcade intro screens have been included, but from what I can gather, the canal scenes are totally missing. We do get the large boss fights, and if you have a 128K system, then you are treated to some excellent AY music. The controls feel great, and the speed of the game is similar to the original. There is even simultaneous two-player action. After 250 videos, I have finally found a home computer I didn't know existed. The Sam Coupe was an 8-bit British computer that was looked upon as the logical upgrade from the ZX Spectrum. There were only 30 to 40 titles released, and only a handful or so were conversions. This one turned out really well with nice detailed sprites and lots of color. The animation is nice and smooth, and it controls fairly well. What lets it down is the actual speed of the game. While not as bad as other versions, it does hinder your enjoyment. The music itself is also very nice. Also, there are not as many enemies on screen at once, which is something the other 8-bit systems suffer from as well. It's pretty good, but it's just too bad that the game wasn't running just a little bit faster. The MS-DOS version looks pretty similar to the Atari ST, although there are 4 different graphic modes all the way down from CGA up to VGA. The speed of the game is very consistent with the Atari ST version and it controls really well. As far as the sound goes, there must have been a lot of overtime down at the Queef factory because things are rocking and rolling as soon as the game starts up. It's best to play this with the sound muted. The good old Commodore 64 version is up next, and quite honestly, it looks a bit like the Spectrum version. If you thought the sprites from the 16-bit versions were nice but way too large, then get a load of this version. It's one thing if the sprites were small but had a bit of detail, but that's not the case here. These look like a lumpy, clumpy mess with dull colors to boot. Monochrome colors in a 1990 video game shouldn't exist, but here we are. Now I'm always totally fair with these assessments and have never been one to crap all over the conversions for no reason. While yes, the sprites are a bit of a mess, the gameplay is responsive. The speed is also on par with the arcade game and it does feature some nice SID music. Also, you cannot duck or jump, and from what I can tell, the level layouts are totally different from the arcade game. Also missing are the canal stages, but at least the boss fights remain. This game is nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. The Amiga version is the creme de la creme when it comes to home conversions of this game. While it does use the standard push scroll that was found in the ST version, it more than makes up for it in the audio department. The music is fantastic and it's leaps and bounds ahead of the ST. You still only have one fire button, but overall it controls great and the speed of the game matches the arcade game perfectly. This is a fantastic conversion and still holds up over 30 years later. And finally, the Amstrad port is really good. Thankfully, it's not just a port of the Spectrum as it features loads of color and lots of details. Similar to other versions, this one is missing the canal stage and all of the cinematics have been scaled back. What really hurts this though is the speed, as this one is probably the slowest. Don't even attempt to try this in 2-player mode either. This version features plenty of bloops and bleeps for sound, but not as bad as the MS-DOS version, which is definitely the queen of the queefs. A version for the Atari Lynx was planned to be released in the early 90s, but it was cancelled. So far, no screenshots or prototypes have ever been discovered. The Atari Jaguar community has been thriving as of late, and a number of people have converted a number of Atari ST titles to run on their beloved system. One of the games they ported was Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters, and it is really good. You now have 2 separate buttons, one for firing and one for bombs. The music has also been given an upgrade and it sounds fantastic. Apparently this version runs just a little bit too fast on the Jaguar emulator, but overall this is a really good port. And that, my friends, takes care of the history of Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters. This is another game that didn't get a whole lot of love back in the day, but with its B-movie roots and quirky adventure, you should definitely check it out. This game has never been re-released, so the only way to try it is through emulation. If you've never had the chance to blast some aliens all the while rescuing some bodacious professors, be sure and give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.